The summer evening of 1995 unfolded with the kind of calm that seemed to belong only to the countryside. The air smelled faintly of hay and earth, with fields stretching out endlessly, kissed by the golden haze of a setting sun. Along one of the narrow dirt roads winding through rural Pennsylvania, a horse-drawn wagon creaked steadily onward, its wooden wheels pressing soft grooves into the dust. Inside the wagon sat two Amish sisters, ages 12 and 14, their white bonnets slightly askew from the day's work and their simple dresses dusted at the hem from walking earlier. Their errand had been straightforward, delivering baked goods to a neighbor, a task the sisters often performed together. It was a small responsibility, but one they took seriously, for it allowed them to contribute to their family's work and gave them moments of independence, however quiet and modest. The horse moved at a steady pace, the reins loose in the elder sister's hands, its rhythmic clopping echoing softly in the open silence. Birds called faintly from the trees as the day slipped into twilight, and the two girls, though reserved in their demeanor, laughed quietly at something only they understood. Witnesses later recalled the faint sound of their voices drifting through the air, a fragile melody of youth and innocence against the still backdrop of farmland. To the people who saw them that evening, there was nothing unusual in the sight. Amish children were often tasked with errands like this, and the familiar image of two sisters riding home in a wagon would not have raised alarm. Back at their farmhouse, the rest of the family busied themselves with evening routines. The parents tended to chores while younger siblings helped gather tools and animals for the night. Every few minutes, the mother glanced down the lane, expecting to see the wagon returning. It was not a long journey, and the girls had done it countless times before. The sun lowered further, brushing the sky with streaks of orange and purple, and the fields darkened at their edges. Lanterns were lit in the farmhouse windows, sending out their warm glow like a signal. Still, the wagon did not appear. At first, their absence caused only a faint unease. Perhaps the horse had slowed, or maybe the girls had stopped to talk with a neighbor along the road. In the Amish way of life, there was little sense of urgency, and time itself felt slower, more deliberate. Yet, as the minutes stretched into an hour, unease turned into quiet concern. The father took a lantern and walked the road, expecting to see the shape of the wagon emerge from the growing dark. But the road was empty, save for the chirping of crickets and the far-off hoot of an owl. As night settled fully, the family's calm broke into worry. Neighbors were summoned, lanterns glowing like scattered fireflies as men on foot and horseback began to search the fields and tree lines. The horse was strong, dependable, and unlikely to wander far without guidance. It should have been easy to spot, yet it was nowhere to be found. The sisters' names were called out again and again, voices carrying through the cool night air, but only silence answered. By midnight, the gravity of the situation was undeniable. Authorities from the nearest town were alerted, though interactions between the Amish and outsiders were often reserved and cautious. Even so, the disappearance of two children could not be ignored. Patrol cars rolled slowly along the dirt roads, their beams of artificial light sweeping across the fields. Dogs were brought in, their noses pressed to the ground where the wagon tracks had last been seen. The trail led forward for a time, then seemed to fade as if swallowed by the land itself. Back at the farmhouse, the mother clutched her youngest child, her face pale beneath her bonnet, her lips whispering prayers. Neighbors spoke in hushed tones, their lanterns flickering shadows across their solemn expressions. It was unthinkable, two young girls vanishing in the span of a single evening, with no sound of distress, no broken harness, no overturned wagon to explain what had happened. For a community rooted in order, simplicity, and faith, the mystery was like a sudden tear in the fabric of their world. As dawn broke, painting the sky with muted light, the search stretched on, but the land seemed unwilling to give up its secret. The wagon, the horse, and the sisters had vanished as if they had been plucked from the earth itself. What began as an ordinary evening would linger for years as the night their community's peace was shattered, leaving behind a silence that no prayer or searching lantern could seem to fill. The first morning after the disappearance brought no relief, only a sharper edge of dread. The search had carried on through the night, lanterns bobbing across fields, their dim circles of light straining to pierce the dark. But as dawn broke over the farmland, washing the landscape in pale gray and gold, the sisters were still gone, and so was the wagon. Neighbors who had walked home at first light returned almost immediately, unwilling to let exhaustion stop them. The Amish community, bound by duty and faith, came together as they always did in times of crisis, their buggies lining the road in silence. Men fanned out on foot, women gathered in quiet groups offering prayer and food for those searching, and children watched wide-eyed, their innocent faces reflecting the gravity of something they could not fully understand. Authorities arrived in greater numbers, their uniforms and vehicles contrasting starkly against the simplicity of the Amish way of life. The sheriff's department, aided by state police, began organizing search teams in a more systematic fashion. Horses, trained dogs, and even boats were brought in to scour the rivers and creeks that threaded through the countryside. Volunteers combed through the tall grasses of the meadows, calling the sisters' names again and again, though their voices seemed to dissolve into the vast emptiness of the land. The wagon's trail was visible at first, shallow grooves in the dirt road left by the wooden wheels. Searchers followed it for miles, only to lose the trail near a bend where the road gave way to a thicket of trees. Some said the marks seemed to fade too suddenly, as if the wagon had simply lifted off the ground and vanished. Others wondered if heavy rain the week before had softened the soil, allowing tracks to disappear more easily. Still, the abrupt end unsettled everyone. The family's farmhouse became the center of activity, though it remained eerily hushed despite the number of people coming and going. Amish families brought bread, stew, and coffee, placing the food quietly on the kitchen table. Investigators huddled in the yard, making notes, questioning neighbors, and drawing rough maps of the surrounding area. They asked if the sisters had any reason to run away, if they had been unhappy, restless, or tempted by the outside world. But every reply was the same: the girls were obedient, deeply rooted in their family's way of life, and unlikely to stray far from home. Days stretched into weeks. Search parties scoured the woods, poked into barns and abandoned sheds, and dredged ponds. Helicopters buzzed overhead, their blades chopping the silence as they scanned the countryside from above. Yet the horse, wagon, and girls remained missing, leaving behind nothing but whispers. Rumors began to creep into nearby towns. Some spoke of strangers seen on the back roads, others of possible runaways, though those who knew the sisters dismissed such ideas quickly. In a community where gossip was discouraged, even the murmurs of speculation felt heavy. Each night, the family's lanterns burned late into the dark, placed by the windows in the quiet hope the sisters might somehow see them and find their way home. The mother's prayers grew more desperate, her voice breaking as she repeated the same words of faith. The father, stoic by nature, wore his grief silently, his shoulders bent under the weight of something no man could carry easily. Younger siblings watched with confusion, their childhood innocence eroded by the sudden and terrifying truth that the world was not as safe as they had believed. As summer shifted into autumn, the leaves blazed into fiery colors, but the beauty of the season only deepened the sorrow. Investigators eventually admitted that leads had run dry. Without evidence of foul play and no bodies to prove tragedy, the case hovered in a painful limbo. The search teams dwindled, volunteers returning to their own farms, and eventually only the family remained, left with the hollow ache of questions that had no answers. The sisters' disappearance became a story whispered at gatherings, a cautionary tale for Amish children who asked why they could not stray too far. For the parents, however, it was not a tale but a living wound. Every creak of the farmhouse floor, every sound of a wagon passing in the distance, every voice calling in the fields seemed to echo with the absence of their daughters. The once ordinary sight of an empty dirt road had become unbearable, a reminder of the evening their lives had shifted from routine to nightmare. Months passed. Snow eventually blanketed the land in silence, hiding the tracks and trails that had once been scoured for clues. With each passing season, the likelihood of answers seemed to fade, yet the grief remained raw. The wagon had been seen, the sisters had been seen, and then, nothing. A disappearance as sudden and complete as if the earth itself had opened and swallowed them whole. Nearly a decade had passed since the sisters vanished, yet the story lingered in hushed tones throughout the surrounding towns and Amish settlements. What had begun as an urgent search had slowly become little more than a haunting memory, filed away in the minds of investigators and buried under the grief of the family. By 2004, the case was long considered cold, but the land still carried secrets. In a stretch of woods several miles from the old farmhouse, time and nature had reclaimed what once bustled with activity, an abandoned mine that locals rarely spoke of. The mine had been sealed years before, when its usefulness ran out and danger outweighed profit. Trees had grown thick around its entrance, and vines wove themselves tightly over rotting beams and rusted equipment. It was a place few ever ventured near, a scar on the land slowly swallowed by wilderness. On a late summer afternoon, a group of young urban explorers, drawn by a fascination with forgotten places, stumbled upon the site. They were not locals, just travelers chasing rumors of old structures hidden in Pennsylvania's countryside. To them, the mine was a curiosity, a place that promised mystery and the thrill of discovery. The air grew noticeably cooler as they approached the entrance, the ground damp with years of seepage. Their voices dropped to whispers as they stepped into the yawning blackness, the sound of dripping water echoing faintly from somewhere deep within. Flashlights sliced through the dark, revealing jagged rock walls and the remnants of machinery left to decay. Rusted chains hung from the ceiling like relics of another time, and piles of collapsed timber lay where the earth had given way. Each step crunched on gravel and broken stone, the sound magnified in the hollow silence. Though the explorers had expected unease, what they found instead was an oppressive heaviness, as though the very air resisted their intrusion. As they pressed deeper, one of the explorers noticed something unusual half buried beneath rubble near a side tunnel. At first, it appeared to be nothing more than a jumble of wood, but its shape was too deliberate, too crafted to be dismissed as fallen debris. The beams of their flashlights swept over it, illuminating curved edges and spokes that did not belong in a mine. "It looks like a wheel," one of them muttered, his voice trembling with a mix of disbelief and unease. They cleared away some of the loose stones and earth, and slowly the outline revealed itself. What had seemed like random wood began to take form, and soon the unmistakable structure of a wagon emerged. Its frame was weathered, coated in grime, yet still eerily intact. The iron rims of its wheels were rusted, the harness straps frayed and stiff, but the image was undeniable. It was a horse-drawn wagon, hidden in the belly of the mine where no wagon should ever be. The explorers fell silent, their flashlights trembling slightly in their hands. For a moment, no one spoke, each one sensing that they had stumbled onto something far darker than the adventure they had sought. The wagon looked as though it had been placed there deliberately, tucked away in the shadows and left to rot. On the wooden floor of the cart lay scraps of fabric, faded with time, their colors muted but still visible. One explorer reached for a piece, then pulled his hand back quickly, as if touching it might break some unspoken boundary. The realization settled slowly, heavily, this was not just a relic. This was connected to a story, a mystery nearly forgotten. Though they were strangers to the area, fragments of rumor surfaced in their minds. The old tale of the missing Amish sisters, the wagon that had disappeared without a trace. Could this truly be it? The coincidence was too sharp, the details too precise to dismiss. The explorers backed away, their nerves stretched thin by the eerie discovery. None dared venture further into the wagon, fearful of what else they might uncover. Instead, they hurried back to the surface, their breaths unsteady, their voices hushed as they debated what to do. The choice was clear. Authorities had to be notified. By the time they returned with law enforcement, the sun had already dipped behind the trees, and the mine loomed like a gaping wound in the landscape. The officers who followed them inside stood frozen when the beams of their flashlights fell upon the wagon. Men who had worked the case years ago exchanged looks of disbelief, their faces lined with age and memory. After nearly a decade, the trail that had vanished so abruptly now led into the suffocating dark of a forgotten mine. The forest above swayed in the evening breeze, indifferent to what had been found below. For the first time in 9 years, the case had shifted from stillness into motion, though the answers it would provide promised to be as unsettling as the silence that had endured for so long. The mine became a place of hushed tension the night authorities returned with the explorers. The flashing lights of patrol cars glowed faintly against the tree line, their colors muted beneath the thick canopy. A cordon was quickly set up around the entrance, and officers worked carefully, their boots crunching on gravel as they carried lanterns and powerful flashlights into the suffocating dark. The abandoned mine had been sealed off for years, yet now it stirred again, shadows stretching as beams of light swept across the rock walls. For the investigators, who stepped inside, many of them veterans who had worked the sisters' case in 1995, it felt like stepping back into a wound they thought had scarred over long ago. The air was heavy with dampness, thick and cold. Every footstep echoed like a hollow drumbeat as they navigated deeper into the tunnels, past rotted beams and collapsed shafts. The explorers led the way, their nervous voices barely audible as they described what they had found. And then, as the tunnel widened, the wagon revealed itself once more beneath the trembling beams of light. There it stood, almost eerily preserved, as though frozen in time. The investigators stopped in silence. The wagon was unmistakably Amish in design, wooden, modest, yet practical, with iron rims now corroded by age. Its wheels were half sunk into the damp earth, caked with layers of mud and mineral dust. The harness straps hung limply, cracked and brittle, as though the horses had once been fastened there but vanished without a trace. In the corners of the cart lay scraps of cloth, faded, fragile, some with faint floral patterns still visible. One officer crouched down, his gloved hand carefully lifting a piece. The fabric disintegrated slightly under his touch, yet the impression it left was undeniable. These were remnants of dresses, the kind traditionally worn by Amish girls. A silence settled over the group, the kind that carries weight, as if even the walls of the mine bore witness to the grim discovery. For years, the missing wagon had been the central riddle of the sisters' disappearance. Search parties in 1995 had combed miles of roads, fields, and rivers, looking for it. Some believed it had been dismantled or hidden, others that it had been taken far away. But here it was, in the last place anyone had thought to look, buried in a mine shaft where no wagon could have gone by accident. The sheriff, older now, with gray streaking his beard, ran a hand down his tired face. After all these years, he muttered softly, his voice breaking the silence, "We find it here." He and the other officers exchanged uneasy looks. If the wagon was here, then the sisters had likely been brought here too. That possibility hung unspoken in the cold air, but it lingered in every mind present. Forensic teams were called in. Equipment was hauled down into the mine, cameras flashing in the darkness, tripods clicking into place, and evidence markers placed carefully around the site. Each creak of the wagon seemed amplified, each flutter of fabric a whisper of the past. The damp earth surrounding the wagon was sifted and brushed, but no clear remains surfaced. Bones. None. Personal belongings. Only scraps of fabric and rusted metal, their origins nearly impossible to date. The officers tried to piece together the impossible question: how had the wagon been dragged into the mine? The entrance was narrow, its incline steep. The possibility of horses pulling it in was unlikely, too dangerous, too impractical. That left one conclusion: someone had brought it here deliberately, piece by piece, or else forced it in with unnatural effort. The realization chilled them further. This was not a matter of accident or nature. This was human intent. Outside the mine, word spread quickly. Reporters gathered at the cordon, their voices buzzing with speculation. Locals whispered once again about the sisters, their disappearance no longer a fading memory but a wound reopened. For the Amish community, the discovery was met with quiet mourning. Though they did not involve themselves with the press or public speculation, lanterns flickered late into the night in their farmhouses, families praying once more for answers. As the investigation pressed deeper into the mine, officers explored adjoining tunnels. Some collapsed. Chambers revealed signs of disturbance, loose rocks, timbers that appeared moved rather than naturally fallen. Yet nothing conclusive emerged. It was as though the mine itself kept its secrets, offering only fragments of the story. Standing before the wagon, one investigator admitted what everyone was thinking. "This was meant to be hidden," he said quietly. "Someone put it here so it would never be found." His words carried the weight of a decade of unanswered questions. As dawn crept across the horizon above, the team finally emerged from the mine, their clothes damp, their faces drawn. The wagon remained inside, guarded now, its haunting presence preserved until it could be studied further. What they had uncovered was not closure, but a doorway to even deeper mystery. The sisters' fate remained unknown, but the chilling image of their wagon in the dark heart of an abandoned mine ensured the case would never again be forgotten. The discovery of the wagon brought with it a storm of questions, but few answers. In the weeks that followed, the mine became the center of a renewed investigation, a place both dreaded and obsessed over. Authorities sealed off the entrance, setting up floodlights and guards, while forensic teams combed every inch of the damp, crumbling tunnels. News outlets, starved for closure in a case that had haunted the region for nearly a decade, descended on the small Pennsylvania town. Reporters called it a breakthrough. For the family, however, it was not hope they felt, but a deep, gnawing sorrow that the mystery had returned to the forefront of their lives. The Amish community responded in their quiet way. They did not grant interviews, nor did they seek the attention that the discovery brought. Instead, they gathered in barns and meeting houses, bowing their heads in long, somber prayers. For them, the wagon was not just an object, it was a vessel carrying memory and pain. It had been the last place the sisters were known to be alive, and now it had surfaced in a space filled with darkness and human intent. While outsiders speculated, they mourned in silence. Investigators tried to piece together what little they had. The wagon was examined with care, its every surface photographed and tested. The fabric scraps inside were compared against what the girls had been wearing when they vanished, and though time had blurred the evidence, faint traces suggested a match. Soil samples from the wheels were analyzed, showing minerals consistent with the mine floor, but that only confirmed what they already knew: it had been there for years. No fingerprints, no clear DNA, no remains. The earth, damp and unforgiving, had erased much of what might have been left behind. The greatest mystery remained how the wagon had been moved. The incline of the mine, the weight of the cart, and the absence of any clear trail suggested careful planning. Someone would have needed knowledge of the area, strength, and perhaps even help to place it so far inside. That pointed toward more than a single fleeting act of violence. It hinted at deliberate concealment, a secret meant to stay buried forever. Speculation exploded. Some locals whispered that the sisters had been lured into the mine by someone they knew, perhaps promised a shortcut home or enticed by false kindness. Others believed the wagon had been hidden there after the fact, the girls already gone, their fate sealed elsewhere. Theories grew wilder with each passing week, yet none carried the weight of certainty. For the family, the unanswered questions were almost worse than silence had been. They longed to know, yet dreaded what the truth might reveal. In the farmhouse, the parents grew older beneath the weight of grief that never lifted. Each day, they passed the empty chairs where their daughters once sat, their eyes tracing the horizon as if waiting for something to return. When asked about the discovery, the father only shook his head. "A wagon tells us nothing," he said softly. "A wagon is not our daughters." The mother's prayers grew quieter, less pleading, more resigned, as though she had already accepted that she would never hold her children again. The case remained technically open, files pulled from dusty cabinets and placed once more on desks. Yet without new leads, investigators found themselves circling the same unanswered questions. The mine had given up its secret, but only halfway. It had revealed the wagon, yes, but not the truth of what had happened inside its shadows. The sisters' fate remained as obscured as it had been the night they vanished. Over time, the renewed frenzy died down. Reporters left. Forensic teams packed up. The mine was resealed, its entrance blocked once more with heavy beams and warnings of danger. But for those who had seen the wagon in the suffocating dark, the image lingered. It became something they carried with them, a haunting reminder of a case unsolved, of innocence stolen and hidden where no one should have ever found it. The community moved on outwardly, but scars remained. Children were watched more closely. Roads that once felt safe were seen differently. The family, though surrounded by faith, lived with the hollow ache of a mystery without closure. The sight of the wagon resting in the abandoned mine entered the lore of the region, told in hushed voices as a warning, as a story that both terrified and saddened. 9 years of silence had ended not with truth, but with another shadow, one that made the mystery deeper still. The sisters had vanished, and though their wagon was found, their story remained unfinished. In the end, all that remained was a chilling image. A simple Amish wagon, preserved in darkness, a mute witness to secrets the earth still refused to give up.